Today we start First Chronicles, but First Chronicles is mostly lists. So let's see what we can make out of this without reading through all the lists. So chapter 1 is the historical records from Adam to Abraham. So it goes through and lists all the sons and the families, the rulers. Yes, and then chapter 2 are Israel's sons, Jacob's sons. So they go through with all the sons of Jacob, and they're just listing the sons. In chapter 3, we get to the sons of David. He had a lot of sons. He had 6 sons before he became king, and then he had 4 sons to Bathsheba, and then 9 more sons. So he had a lot of sons. And then it lists the kings of Judah. Lots of royalty, of course. And then in chapter 4, other clans of Judah. And then there's an interesting paragraph that stands out, which I think we all know, is chapter 4. It starts the lists, the descendants of Judah, and it starts listing sons and sons and sons. And in verse 9, it says, Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. His mother had named him Jabez, saying, I gave birth to him in pain. Jabez cried out to the God of Israel, Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from harm so that I will be free from pain. And God granted his request. I love that. And I love that in the midst of all these lists. So we're now in chapter 4, where they've only so far listed sons. And every once in a while mentioned a daughter or a wife, if they thought she was significant. And then they told the story of his prayer, which means his prayer is so significant, so important. And it's a legal prayer for us today. So just a good one to note. I have it circled and highlighted in my Bible. And then it continues on listing other clans of Judah. And then it goes on to Simeon. And chapter 4 of First Chronicles chapter 4 ends with verse 38. The men listed above by name were leaders of their clans. Their families increased greatly, and they went to the outskirts of Gedor, to the east of the valley, in search of pasture for their flocks. They found rich, good pasture, and the land was spacious, peaceful, and quiet. Some Hamites had lived there formerly. The men whose names were listed came in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah. They attacked the Hamites in their dwellings, and also the Maonites who were there, and completely destroyed them, as is evident to this day. There they settled in their place because there was pasture for their flocks. And 500 of these Simeonites, led by Pelatiah, Neriah, Rephaiah, and Uzziel, the sons of Ishi, invaded the hill country of Seir. They killed the remaining Amalekites who had escaped, and they have lived there to this day. Chapter 5. The sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel. He was the firstborn, but when he defiled his father's marriage bed, his rights as firstborn were given to the sons of Joseph, son of Israel. So he could not be listed in the genealogical record in accordance with his birthright. And though Judah was the strongest of his brothers and a ruler came from him, the rights of the firstborn belonged to Joseph. Thought that was pretty significant. And then they list the sons of Reuben. And then the sons of Gad. And the chapter ends with the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. I'm at verse 18. Had 44,760 men ready for military service, able-bodied men who could handle shield and sword, who could use a bow and were trained for battle. They waged war against the Hagrites, Jeter, Naphish, and Nodab. They were helped in fighting them, and God handed the Hagrites and all their allies over to them because they cried out to him during the battle. He answered their prayers because they trusted in him. They seized the livestock of the Hagrites, 50,000 camels, 250,000 sheep, and 2,000 donkeys. They also took 100,000 people captive, and many others fell slain, because the battle was God's. I love that. And they occupied the land until the exile. The people of the half-tribe of Manasseh were numerous. They settled in the land from Bashan to Baal Hermon, that is, to Senir, Mount Hermon. These were the heads of their families: Epher, Ishi, Elul, Azrael, Jeremiah, Hodaviah, and Jediel. They were brave warriors, famous men, and heads of their families. But they were unfaithful to the God of their fathers and prostituted themselves to the gods of the peoples of the land, whom God had destroyed before them. So the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, that is, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, who took the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh into exile. He took them to Hala, Habor, Hara, and the river of Gozan, where they are to this day. Chapter 6 is the tribe, lists all the sons of the tribe of Levi, and in the middle it stops at verse 31 and says, "These are the men David put in charge of the music in the house of the Lord after the ark came to rest there. They ministered with music before the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, until Solomon built the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. They performed their duties according to the regulations laid down for them." And then they list the men who served together with their sons. And it's a long list. Verse 48 picks up, "Their fellow Levites were assigned to all the other duties of the tabernacle, the house of God. But Aaron and his descendants were the ones who presented offerings on the altar of burnt offerings and on the altar of incense in connection with all that was done in the most holy place, making atonement for Israel in accordance with all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded." These were the descendants of Aaron, just a short paragraph. Verse 54, "These were the locations of their settlements allotted as their territory, as they are assigned to the descendants of Aaron, who were from the Kohathite clan, because the first lot was for them." And then it says all the land that they were given. Yes, and then it finishes with the land. What tribes had what land, which we read about before. And then goes on to chapter 7. These are the tribes of the line of, the sons of Issachar and Benjamin, Naphtali, and Manasseh, and Ephraim. There's a paragraph in verse 28. "Their lands and settlements included Bethel and its surrounding villages, Naran to the east, Gezer and its villages to the west, and Shechem and its villages all the way to Aya and its villages." The descendants of Joseph, son of Israel, lived in these towns. And then it continues with the tribe of Asher. And then chapter 8 is the genealogy of Saul, the Benjamite. And it goes on to list all of the descendants of Saul. And then chapter 9 the people of Judah were taken captive to Babylon because of their unfaithfulness. Now the first to resettle on their own property in their own towns were some Israelites, priests, Levites, and temple servants. Those from Judah, from Benjamin, and from Ephraim and Manasseh who lived in Jerusalem were Uthiel, son of Ammah. So they start listing the people that came back first to fill the land. And the gatekeepers. Altogether, those chosen to be gatekeepers at the threshold number 212. They were registered by genealogy in their villages. The gatekeepers had been assigned to their positions of trust by David and Samuel the seer. They and their descendants were in charge of guarding the gates of the house of the Lord, the house called the tent. The gatekeepers were on the 4 sides, east, west, north, and south. Their borders and their villages had to come from time to time and share their duties for 7-day periods. But the 4 principal gatekeepers, who were Levites, were entrusted with the responsibility for the rooms and treasuries in the house of God. They would spend the night stationed around the house of God because they had to guard it, and they had charge of the key for opening it each morning. Some of them were in charge of the articles used in the temple service. They counted them when they were brought in and when they were taken out. Others were assigned to take care of the furnishings and all the other articles of the sanctuary, as well as the flour and wine and oil, incense and spices. But some of the priests took care of mixing the spices. A Levite named Mattathiah, the firstborn son of Shallum the Korahite, was entrusted with the responsibility for baking the offering bread. Some of their Kohathite brothers were in charge of preparing for every Sabbath the bread set out on the table. Those who were musicians, heads of Levite families, stayed in their rooms of the temple and were exempt from other duties because they were responsible for the work day and night. All these were heads of the Levite families, chiefs as listed in their genealogy, and they lived in Jerusalem. And then it lists the genealogy of the Levite families. And that concludes chapter 9. So tomorrow we'll pick up with chapter 10.